I am California of the past.
I am California of the past. I am California of the past.
My name's John Hockaday. This story is about growing up in southwest Pomona in the 30s and 40s. We'll get started by going back to Oklahoma. This is my mom's side of the family, the Loofboro clan, on their Oklahoma farm back in 1912, when horses and mules were doing most of the pulling. In 1920, Grandpa sold the farm, loaded Grandma and her 7.5 kids into 2 Model T Fords and headed for California, camping at night alongside the road or in city parks. Uncle John said the road across the desert was just 2 ruts in the sand, but when they got to the paved road at the summit of Cajon Pass, Grandma thought they finally got to California. When they got to Pomona, they camped in Ganesha Park for a week while Grandpa looked for some land with a house on it. He bought 3 acres and a house at 1408 West Grand. This is a picture postcard of southwest Pomona in 1920. And there's the house and the 3 acres that Grandpa bought. The hill across the bottom of the photo was called Pomona Heights. Today the golf course is on the north side of that hill, and the 71 freeways out of sight across the bottom of the picture. That's the brickyard in the Pomona City dump. Across the road from that was about 6 acres with a house in the middle. Today that's the Little League baseball park. And here's what it looks like today. The hill's still in the same place. They ran Phillips on through and you can see the west end of the golf course. You can't see where Grandpa's house was, but it's still there. That's where the city dump was, and you can see the baseball park today where that old house was in the middle of the field. Grandpa spent the first half of his life with horse-drawn vehicles. And he still liked the old ways, and when they got to Pomona, he bought a fine buggy and a horse to pull it. That's my mom standing there by the rear of the buggy, and my aunts and uncles, and that's Grandma standing on the side porch of the place they bought. Grandpa used that horse to cultivate his 3 acres. He planted a fine orchard of just about every kind of fruit and nut tree you could think of, even planted a small vineyard, and cultivated the rest of the property so they'd have plenty to eat and something to sell. Grandma's cellar was always full of canned peaches, apricots, pears. The pantry in the kitchen was always full of fresh fruits and vegetables. It made the whole house smell good. Here's my mom and her old 25 Dodge Coupe. That's my cousin Elsie standing on the running board. Mom paid for that old Dodge giving music lessons at the Ford Music Company. In 1932, she drove that Dodge back to Oklahoma along old Route 66. My Uncle John went along as chaperone and co-pilot. When I showed John this picture, he told me a story I never heard before. He said that Dad had been a hermit and a bachelor for about 40 years and got cold feet on the courthouse steps and tried to back out of the deal. Uncle John said he was able to grab him just in time before he got away and convince him of the benefits of married life, or I wouldn't be telling this story. Mom hated, after living in California for 10 years, Mom hated Oklahoma. But it took her 4 years to talk Dad into moving west. Here we are on the way to California. That's me in the middle, Mom and Dad, 1936. Dad said when he got to Pomona, he only had 50 cents in his pocket and had to start over. He worked at just about anything that came along, picking oranges and lemons, filling smudge pots, digging ditches, even worked for the WPA for a while. We lived in the orchard behind Grandma and Grandpa's place in an old trailer house under a walnut tree by the irrigation ditch. When my little sister came along, Dad moved into Grandpa's barn to give us more room in the trailer. Mom liked that idea because she said Dad's snoring used to keep us awake at night. In about a year, Dad had saved up some money, and my uncles helped him build a one-room shack a little further back in the orchard between a pear tree and a plum tree. They moved the old trailer alongside, giving us 2 rooms or some sort of a duplex. I thought Grandma's and Grandpa's was the only ones that had bathtubs and toilets. Mom didn't want anybody to know we didn't have inside plumbing, so Dad built the outhouse inside of Grandpa's barn. Most people had 2 rooms and a bath. We had 2 rooms and a path. I grew up right across a old dirt road named Phillips, right across from what everybody called the South Hills. I roamed all over the Phillips and Diamond Paw ranches hunting rabbits back when there were still wild cattle and horses out there. Once I got on a quest to see how things looked from the top of each hill. Depending on which hill and the way you was looking, you could see all sorts of things. I learned to ride my bicycle on the stretch of that old dirt road that people say was once part of the Butterfield stage line. The 2 best hills to see Pomona from was the one we called Top Knot or Pomona Heights. That cultivated field right there is part of the golf course today that runs along Pomona Heights. Back when I'd ditch school and sit on top of them hills, I could look all over Pomona. The tallest thing in Pomona was the sign on top of the Fox Theater. The tallest building was the First National Bank building on West 2nd Street. It had an elevator in it. But back then they weren't automatic. This one had an elevator operator that sat on a stool in front of the controls, and he'd ask you which floor you wanted, and he'd pull a lever and close a door and pull another one, and away you'd go, and he'd say, "Going up." And when he got time to come back down, he'd say, "Going down," and when you'd hit the bottom, he'd open the door and let you out. That was big-time stuff back when I was a kid. Things was a lot quieter back then. When I'd ditch school and sit up there on that hill, I could hear the tardy bell at old Hamilton School more than a mile away. Well, it wasn't really a bell, it was more of a buzzer that made a loud squawking sound. If you wasn't in your seat by the time the buzzer went off, you had to stay after school. And the paper mill down on West Holt had a noon whistle, and you could hear that, and about a few seconds later you could hear the noon whistle at Fairbanks Morris, and I was probably learning more sitting on that hill than I would have in school. I was learning how sound traveled. I could see old Marino stake out his horse, and it looked like when he hit the stake, you didn't hear it until he raised the hammer up over his head to hit it again, and it took it that long for the sound to get there. I heard one story that the Palomars family claimed that way back in their time, they could sometimes hear the church bells at the San Gabriel Mission. Now that had to be real quiet. This is the now picture of me and my sister and the dog was in the middle of the old dirt road called Phillips. This is Phillips today. You can see the golf course. You can see where the cultivated field used to be. You can see old Elephant Hill. There's Grandma and Grandpa in 1920 sitting on the steps of their house on West Grand. Here they are about 40 years later. Grandpa was about 92 and Grandma was about 88. Well, I guess that's about all I got to say for now.